Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful multiverse, and more particularly from beautiful Danville, Illinois, where we are back in winter again today. And this is Midday with Reverend Don, and with me is my guest, Ed the Pagan, and we'll be talking more about pagan power today. Hello, Ed.
How you doing, Don? And yeah, it's kind of cold here in Chicago too.
Yeah, I was just celebrating the return of spring, took the insulation off my windows, opened my windows. What was it? Thursday, Friday,
hmm
and then winter came back, and I've had to put it back up.
and amongst people who grow plants and do the whole thing, they've kind of like, oh, this is an early spring. I've seen this before. It's the nature
Yeah,
of it.
it
Very
happens
little.
frequently.
Well, isn't there statements in like a lion, out like a lamb for
Hmm.
March? At least that was a European statement. I guess there's a lot of phrases we have that are very particular to certain environments that have now become
Yeah,
like universal.
yeah. I grew up with that saying,
I think it's a very northern Midwest thing.
hmm and I usually found that it was pretty accurate. That one end or the other of the month was going to be more difficult. Hello to Mary in the chat room. It's good to see you, Mary.
Mhm.
Um, it
Yep.
it's spring in the Midwest is always a little iffy.
Absolutely. But it does pretend to great things that are going to happen.
Yes,
Nature returns.
it always does.
Yep.
And today we're going to continue talking about the Pagan Power course and the third and final installment, which is coming this Saturday. Hello to Renee in the chat room.
Mhm.
Um, that will be Saturday at 10 a.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern on pagan.world slash pagan hyphen power.
Mhm.
For those who are supporters of Pagan World and others by invitation, including members of my Patreon.
No. The last two classes though are fully available to everybody on
Hmm.
that page. Well,
And
we
they're well worth looking at.
yeah, what is power and the why of power has been done. This one is going to be about the how of power, and it finishes the third piece of this. And once I'm done with this class, I think I'll be pivoting on Monday. Next Monday's Worm Moon, and I'll be announcing more about what's happening with my terraforming business. Let me call it that.
Yes.
Um,
Hello to Antonio in the chat room.
mhm.
Good to see you, Antonio. Um, it is the worm moon, isn't it?
Yes, it's the Worm Moon, and it's a lunar eclipse on top of it,
Yeah.
ahead of the great solar eclipse.
Yes.
And that really explains one of the first things I want to talk about the how of power. One of the things that pagans have had, and high order priesthood and things, is this idea of high ritual,
Hmm.
the way of bringing an entire community together for a ritual and have them feel energy and part of it. So I think one thing that people don't understand, probably one of the greatest pagan powers out there, is have power. How to have power is to be something of a good ritualist.
Hmm.
If you can't be a good ritualist, that's okay. There's lots of other positions for you. But if you
Absolutely.
but if you are a good ritualist, that is really in high demand. I've met very few really good ritualists that can hold my attention and want me to watch through a whole ritual. I've met a lot of mediocre ritualists. I've met a lot of people who are just good ritualists. But a great
Hmm.
ritualist, oh my God, it's breathtaking. It takes your breath away when you see it performed properly.
Yes.
And you want to support that. But there are so few great ritualists in our community.
This is true. Hello to Christine in the chat room. It it's a very specific skill
Mm-hmm.
to be able to simultaneously hold people's attention, raise and focus energy, and keep everything rolling all together. And it takes some practice.
And and that's one of the major powers. So how to power? So be a great ritualist. And I think the second part, I think one that's even more important is the nurturing role.
Hmm.
Um, is the nurturing role, which is the priest or priestess, and it's mostly priestess, and especially of our first elder or elders of our tradition, is
Hmm.
the idea of the nurturing rituals, of being able to help people get through their rituals of birth and death and marriage and hospital stays and healings and all of these. I'll pray for you today. All of these are power. And these represent a way for you to obtain power in the pagan community because people want these things. And if you're willing to do it for them, they're willing to support you. So very few people actually pray for other people. And we believe that it's a power in the magical sense, but in the attention and the ability to move people in the physiological sense, the psychological events, make them want to join groups, want to attend you, buy your books, whatever it wants. This nurturing is one of the most biggest powers that you can do for free.
Absolutely. And hello to Bimby in the chat room.
If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask.
Yes, questions are good.
Yeah. Um, but that's the first step of how. And there's some other real ways of how to power. I mean, I'm going to teach one trick that will change. I think once I call it a trick, and it's not a trick. It's a process that exists in the world, and it's been built on for a long time. So, but when I'm going to explain it in this class on Friday or Saturday. Wow. I'm doing another class on Friday that I'm taping. But it has nothing to do with this. Um,
A worm class.
a worm class, absolutely. I'm about to really get back into being a worm farmer because one of the things about power is you got to live in your truth.
Hmm.
And that's hard for people to live in their truth. And people really won't understand this, but most of the 30 years I've been living other people, my truth inside other people's truths. That's a
Hmm.
big thing. I have actually done classes, and people don't believe it, but I'm not the main leader. I'm historically a number two leader. I mean, I am in support. I'm in doing things, and oftentimes I may take a number one leadership to say for an event,
Hmm.
but it's really in recognition of all the speakers and all the other people. And I
Yeah.
don't say, well, this isn't what I'm doing. This is what we're doing.
Well, and you know that is a very important point. It was the thing that just occurred to me.
Hmm.
And recently, you were posting photos from the Pagan Leadership Conference back in the Chicago Pagan Leadership Conference back in
94.
'94.
Yep.
And the way you opened that conference was, in my opinion, one of the most powerful things you could have done. Because you know most of those people came, as they said themselves, to see the train wreck,
Hmm.
to because they thought, well, here's someone trying to make themselves the king of the community or what have you, which
Hmm.
was not the point of the event at all.
No.
And all you did was basically say, welcome everyone. This is the Chicago Pagan Leadership Coalition, and we want to invite all of the different leaders up to talk about their groups and their activities.
That's what we did.
And that totally changed everything that happened that day.
Hmm.
It became all about them, which is what it was always meant to be about.
Right. And that changed the community altogether. Hmm.
It did. It made a huge positive change.
And that can happen in a moment. So that's an event that created power. But what did we use it for? Well, there would be more conferences, there would be a lot of public ritual,
Mhm.
and we'd see a lot of growth, a lot of newspapers, a lot of things that we learned in Chicago.
I don't
But
think the Chicago community has ever had more publicity than it did in
mm-mm,
those years,
no.
or more events in a shorter period of time by more different groups.
Hmm.
At least one of which is still going on all these years later, the Fellowship of Isis conference.
Oh, sure.
And Bimby in the chat room says, I'm actually fairly interested in being a worm farmer.
Follow my page.
Yeah,
You can follow my page at A Hubbard or also healthyworms.com. Um,
because we like healthy worms.
And actually, let me just go ahead and talk about power. So I've been looking at it, and people don't realize, why am I going back into the worm business? One, I need an income. I need a sufficient and suitable income to take me through these next few years. And worms, believe it or not, are more today. Worms are being offered for more expensive than Wagyu beef, which is out of the top of silver, or Kobe beef. I'm finding them now. There's like people selling them for a pound of worms for $80. I can't believe they're getting away with that.
Well,
But it is a way.
worms are good food.
Yeah. Well, everything likes a
Not
good
necessarily
worm.
for us, but
Oh, even for us. I mean, we could eat them instead of some of the fish stuff.
well,
I mean,
yeah.
and there are cultures, and there's Native American dishes with earthworms in it. I
Mm.
mean, there's a lot of
And
different. Yeah.
aren't they
Huh.
used to feed fish?
Well, that's it. They could be, but
Hmm.
no one's going to feed caviar to fish.
Well,
No
yeah.
one's going to sell Kobe beef to fish. There's a worldwide shortage of worms to meet the needs that would real, so that it makes it a luxury product. It's a composting project. It's something you do to make the environment better, but nobody has yet scaled it. That's my job, scaling that
Absolutely.
sale. But if we were to say get into a scalable situation where we could produce tons and tons of worms for under $2 a pound. Remember, we're talking about 30, 40, 50, $70 a pound to $2 a pound and make it profitable. It would actually be a sustainable world.
Hmm.
I mean, and there's probably some worm farmers that have to go, what do you mean $2 a pound? I can't make it work. Well, that's true. It might not be able to. But there's power in that, both the vision of creating something that's sustainable. Um, you can do it, but mostly right now they're saying, yeah, Billy says, good composters. I don't know how I feel as a vegan. That's up to you guys. I mean, but right now they're being sold for mostly composting purposes. No
Hmm.
one's really buying them to eat. Trust me. They're not that tasty compared to the value of other foods of the same type.
Yeah.
But they will eat everything you leave behind to scrap. So there's a lot of a power of finances if you can raise worms for under, say, $30 a pound and sell
Hmm.
them for $30 a pound, $40 a pound, $50 a pound.
You had mentioned that you're planning to revive the "Will They Eat It"
Sure,
videos,
sure I am.
which was
So,
all about what earthworms will eat,
or
which is
can't,
most anything.
what they can eat, yeah. And we'll test it in different ways to eat and how long it takes. There's a lot of room for it. I just was watching something called Elm Dirt today, elmdirt.com. Check them out. And they had a commercial about the fact that they were using worm castings. They're only 4 years old and grow worm in the basement. And now have a warehouse, and they're producing 100,000 bottles of plant juice that's helping them. And the reason why they formed the company, this young woman, was because of the need of chemicals, fertilizers that wouldn't harm her children and her pets and would be good for their bodies.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of value in that, but this is what we talk about power, how to power. So for me, that is how to power. But it also has a secondary power that's deep inside my faith. And that is, I will be able to provide income to my community for those who will build it. It's not just about me growing a few worms, it's a lot of work. We're talking about possibility of growing tons and putting people to work and people to assign work and then buying land and preserving that land and returning it back into a situation. Everybody goes, oh, climate change is coming. Yeah, okay. I know it. I'm completely convinced. I've told you that before. But what can we do to build our own biomes? It may be that we wipe out the planet with a desert, but are we going to be the ones who build the oases? And I have a vision of building oases, bio areas where we were raising worms, we're raising food, we're raising our pagan authority. Um, and that's what the how-to class is: how to raise your authority, not just in paganism, but in the world. So, what is Saturday's class about? How to
Hmm.
raise your authority. For me, being Ed the Pagan is cool and all, but Ed the Wormfarger has a lot more authority in the world than I will ever have as a pagan. Just truth, because
Yes.
it's true. I mean, Ed the Worm Farmer is better known, believe it or not, is better known to governmental and higher end officials and into the environmental movement than Ed the Pagan. Ed the Pagan, as a brand, who you know, is known all over the world, but it's very light. 300,000 people, maybe 500,000 people, maybe a million people. I really think somebody put it out there that about 3.5 million people know who I am enough to recognize a picture of me, and maybe 10 million people overall have heard of me. And I've been exposed to over 100 million people over the last 30 years.
Hmm.
That's influence, that's attention, that's important.
Oh, yes.
I'm probably one of the more known pagans in the world. But yeah, as a worm farmer, I'll be paid more attention to. I'll be able to make a better living. I'll make a better income. And I'll be able to teach classes to mainstream people. I can do a lot more to help Gaia, i.e., make the world a better place, than I can make it a more spiritual place. And that's really why I'm making this pivot. And this is why I'm teaching this class. I want people to understand how we do this, how they can do it, so that I don't feel like I have to do it all the time myself. Truth. And I mean that. When I see something, I really just want to jump in and get it for ourselves. And I have a difficult time with that. I don't know if you saw my video from 6 years ago, reposted it, how I do have an aversion to documentation.
Hmm.
That's a power, that's a weakness.
Yeah.
But if you love documentation and now you go, oh, we're archivists. Uh, if we're archivists, we got one of the biggest things I have is tons and tons of records. I mean, so I'm a documenter, kind of, sort of.
Yeah. Hello
But
to Janet in the chat room.
but I'm not a historian by any measure. I'm a documentarian, an archivist.
Hmm.
I am not a historian.
Yeah.
But
When it comes to historical documents, the vault is very deep.
oh, sure. And there's a difference there, isn't there?
Oh, yes, there is.
We're seeing people like Morgan Dahmer, I believe, and Jason Mankey and Wade, and a lot of people being much concerned about history,
Hmm.
history, and try Ronald Hutton, and a lot of them, trying to make sense of our old history. But all I've ever really cared about is what we're doing to move forward. I've always been a forward-leaning person, and this is where a lot of my authority comes in. But you don't have authority if you don't have attention. How do you get attention? I'll explain to you different ways to get attention and how you can develop yourself. And guess what, guys? I'm going to teach you a few. So I will teach one thing above all else, and that is be authentic, be yourself. I don't care. Hmm. Uh,
Well, that's a very important point. You've always had a very distinct style, um,
hmm
appearance-wise, voice-wise, etc. So have I, and I think that not conforming to anyone else's idea of style is a very powerful thing.
Well, even the way I gained authority in a time when books were the authority, you were not an authority without a book. I built the first radio shows.
Hmm.
And that gave me standing and footing with a lot of the people who are authors.
Yeah.
And no one had seen that before. My game in the media, I've been published in over 400 articles and responsible for that many more for people
Hmm.
all over the world. I've been interviewed in almost every medium that I know of, and I've been interviewed across 6 continents.
Hmm.
And played on 7 because we've had fans in Antarctica.
Well, it's
Uh,
true.
you know, um, so that's where that. But I will also tell you one of the things, a how-to power. You have to have a way to measure it so you know where you're at.
Yes.
I will say that one of the most powerful voices in our community is often never heard and really doesn't stand for us, and that's Oberon Zell.
Hmm.
He's heard in the community. He's the most powerful voice in the community, but he's not the most powerful voice of our community.
Hmm.
That would be to go to Phyllis Karat.
Hmm.
That would go to Patrick McCullum. Patrick McCullum is now down in the down after all that knee surgery and all that stuff. He's down right now in South America. I believe South America,
Yeah, I
fighting,
believe so.
fulfilling a belief in his own a prophecy that has been made in his belief of his own role in it.
Hmm.
And he's talking to the world. Starhawk is a person who's got a great deal of voice, almost deniably almost no voice in the pagan community. No one really talks about Starhawk, but if you talk about the ecosystems of the world and the green things and her particular groups of how they save the world through their ecosystems, tremendous voice.
Hmm.
In fact, no voice inside the pagan world has a great deal of voice outside of it. Hmm.
And Christine in the chat room says, my front yard and the fields around my house are alive with all the movement of night crawlers.
Yep.
Uh,
And that's kind of wet. And that's why we in nature. So, what did our ancestors do? They began naming the moons for the activity that would follow them so they can have an agricultural record. And that gave them power over the environment enough to make it their environment. What is power? Power is ultimately making an environment favorable to you and yours.
yeah, that's a very good definition.
That's okay, Janet. You can always watch it later. We're always available. And this will be available years from now. That's one of the things. But voting is very important. Today, go out and vote. Today, go out and vote.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Vote, vote, vote. And why do you vote? Is because at least it shows an interest. I don't know that, you people will say it's good, it's bad, or anything else. I don't care who you vote for. I think it's a very important act of power.
Hmm.
Starhawk is one of my favorite people too, and I think she's written really well. I think she's very deep in the pagan community. But if Starhawk came out today with a message, I don't know that she could get it into the pagan community. Right. I'm not sure that she could get the voice out to the pagan community in a way that, say, well, let me go ahead and say, like someone like a Mary Hawk could,
Hmm.
somebody like you can. Um, there's very few people who can get out of voice out to the community itself. So we have a lot. So one of the how tos is how do you build power within the community, but how to build power with you, which is more important out in the world. And they're not the same thing.
Hmm.
They're deeply related, but they're not the same thing.
Well, that's one of the things I think that
Hmm.
I think that people, I'm not going to say just pagans, but people often have this very simplified understanding of words like power,
Hmm.
when it's actually a very broad term in terms of how it can be applied. What constitutes community power is so many different things.
Well, let's talk about something that's very real world and a word that we get caught up into and get caught too badly for ourselves. The word cult.
Hmm.
Do you know that there are major propagandists called advertising agents who develop something called a brand?
Hmm.
And what is a brand but a memory of a product, item, or thought that conveys a message so that you will spend your money towards it?
Yeah.
What's the difference between a cult and a brand? Well, a brand is a cult if it's really good. And they're actually teaching a course. One of the courses that I keep being offered is 7 steps to build a cult, a brand cult. And what's a brand cult? So let me go ahead and we'll start with the simplest one out there. Coca-Cola versus Pepsi. How many people like Pepsi over Coca-Cola? Fair amount. How many of you will wear a Pepsi jacket? How many, if I offered on eBay a Pepsi plate, would you buy? Or if I had a vintage Pepsi glass? Pepsi's a brand. No, you're not going to want that. But what if I get a 1988 Coca-Cola jacket that was worn around Daytona Beach? Or no, I'm sorry, the Indy 500. There was actually a Coca-Cola brand jacket
Yep.
issued around NASCAR in 1988 that I could sell you for $1,000. And you go, oh, no one would pay that. Go, oh, I would be lucky if I had for more than 24 hours at that price.
Yeah.
Old old Coca-Cola glasses, old Coca-Cola bottles,
Very collectible.
cult, because it has nothing to do with consuming Coke, but
That's
your
true.
love of a Coke, and it sends out a status that if I drink Coke, you drink Coke, we're kind of already friends.
Yeah.
Cults allow people to become friends over a third party or third item, right?
That's a very interesting way of looking at it.
Mm-hmm. That rock looks like your rock god looks the same as my rock god. We must be cousins.
Hmm.
We share the same god. So let me leave one. I know we're coming in, but let me leave one thing about how to gain power. Do you know what I believe more so? And I've said this for 30 years. I keep saying it. I keep saying it to people, and people still don't believe me. And yet, this year I see it in terrible large place inside the Corellian tradition. What is the number one power and the one vacuum in almost all of pagandom? And if you could solve it, you have authority, accountability, attention, possibly happiness, any number of things. But the number one gap inside paganism are people are lonely.
Hmm.
Pagan people, individually and collectively, are very, very lonely. And anyone that makes them feel less lonely and feel more accepted and find ways to bridge that pain, where our broken pieces, instead of being shards against each other, form a jigsaw puzzle to make a beautiful picture. Solving how to gain authority inside the pig community. And I think the larger community as well, but you have to have a place to attach, is deal with the loneliness in our community,
Hmm.
the tremendous, painful loneliness. When people ask me, why did witch school work? Because it taught witchcraft? No, lots of people are teaching witchcraft. It taught community and built a family, the great family.
Hmm.
And some of the events over the last year, I can see the loneliness within that community. There are people who are more lonely now
Hmm.
because of what happened, because of the fact that they couldn't hold it together. And they don't know how to answer that call. Hopefully, the Corellian leadership will start answering that call to deal with that loneliness again. But loneliness is the number one place, the number one hunger, the number one demand of pagan communities. And they want to end that loneliness. They want to feel part of a family, they want to feel fulfilled, and they want to be part of something that's bigger than themselves. Loneliness.
Hmm. No, I think that's one of the greatest needs of humans in general.
Why did witch school exist? Because people couldn't find training. They were lonely and couldn't find training. And when it was available online, they joined.
Hmm.
You know, People don't realize the early witch school, we had a lot of things right. We were like a chat, we had chat rooms and e
Hmm.
groups. We set up all sorts of communication networks. And Facebook took a little bit of that away, but they still do today. They're going to have illustration
Yep,
in Danville here soon.
we are.
So, and that's a way for them to answer where they're less lonely online. This makes it even more easy to feel and to feel less lonely because then you can see the people, you can smell the people. Don't tell me you can't smell them. You just don't realize it. We all have these scents and pheromones and exhalations. You can eat with them, a very human communal thing. So these events, festivals, illustrations, people who gain authority through those is because I know you're going to help me with what? My loneliness.
Hmm.
Maybe for maybe just for a few hours, like on a pagan parade afternoon, maybe for months because I join a group, maybe for years because I've really kind of keep active, or maybe for a lifetime because I'm able to join a group like the Corellians or ATC
Hmm.
or other major groups, Fellowship of Isis, and they're going to give me structure so I can interact with people who will respect me and care for me. And that's why Fellowship of Isis has been around for a long time. That's why ATC has been around for a long time. The truth is that's why Llewellyn has been around for a long time because they care about books.
Yep.
There's a lot of 30-year-old festival. Byron Ballard's Mother Temple's been there for decades
Hmm.
because they deal with this one issue. How to gain pagan power? Well, I'll talk about many things, but one thing is about dealing with loneliness. Loneliness in a leader is a terrible feeling, and why we do some of the stuff we do. And it's also really important when you can heal other people of that feeling, that loneliness.
And Christina in the chat room says, I love the sense of belonging I get from being a Corellian priestess. Thank you, Christine.
So Saturday, 10 o'clock. Let me go ahead and finish it off. Central Time. I'm going to give you at least 5 hardball, real world ways to gain power. That if you do, you'll gain more authority within your field. And then I'll talk about a lot of the soft power. It'll be the same as last week. It'll be about 45 minutes long. And if you attend live, you'll be able to go into the second part, which is an uncensored and, more importantly, unrecorded section of it. But if you want to see the last two, it's up. The last two are up, and this is the last one. And this will be the last one that I do for a while as I pivot back into Ed the Pagan Gaius, the worm farmer, back to permaculture, back to growing something.
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you for joining me today.
Mm-hmm.
We have come to the end of our half hour. I will be back tomorrow with Chris Copeland, talking about recent developments at Corellian Publishing. On Thursday, I'll be talking about the Equinox Sabbats, Ostara, and Mavon. And Friday will be a best of interview with Belladonna Laveau. Hopefully you're enjoying the show. I want to thank everyone for joining us. And let us close with our prayer, as we always do. And Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives, and we ask you to help us to find the best paths for us to follow in life. Help us to know how to exercise power in our own lives, power in our own selves. Help us to know how to survive this world and thrive in it. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love and thanks, and may you be blessed now and always. And I thank you for joining me. I'll see you tomorrow, and may you be blessed now and always.